everyone, and welcome back to Reading Crossbow. Before we dive into this book, I just want to say thank you, because we've actually had some more subscribers lately, and we are getting close to 100. 10 or 11 away, we're almost there. Maybe we can do it. Yeah, maybe we can do it on this video. If you like and subscribe, please do that now before you watch. But I've got Rob here to tell you about this book.
All right, so the book we're reading this week is A Sword of Bronze and Ashes by Anna Smith Spark. And this is, by its own description, a lyrical folk horror fantasy book. And it is a lot of book for its size. What do you think?
It's a lot of book for our little podcast. Like, we jumped into this podcast like, oh, romantasy, oh, grimdark, and then I just wasn't expecting like poetic horror, which it is. There's a lot of horror in this book. There's a lot of ooey gooey blood and just also poems. I don't. So weird.
Yeah, so this book kind of is lightly kind of at least inspired by maybe Celtic or Welsh mythology, and it kind of follows a main character. Her name is Canda, and she is a farm wife. She's raised 3 kids with her husband Delit, and when coming towards her farm are some enemies from her past. It kind of turns out that she used to be like some sort of, supernatural, heroic badass. And her enemies from the past are coming to get their revenge on her. And her family had no idea that she was this mythologically amazing warrior long before she had met her husband. And now she has to kind of gather up the family and head for the hills to keep ahead of her enemies. And
literally,
yeah,
heads for the hills. I know, that's so good, Rob.
And this is a pretty wild story. It is by far, I would say, the most challenging to read book that we've had on the show. What do you think?
Yeah, I said in my halfway, this was almost a DNF. So for kind of new readers out here, that means did not finish. And so if you haven't actually checked out the halfway, go back and do that. The halfway is kind of like our way of giving you a quick rundown of each other's books. So Rob recommended this month. I recommended The Familiar. And so I get to give my halfway reviews on this, which is like, okay, I'm not done reading this yet, but what am I thinking? And then this episode is where we give like both of us kind of talk about it. So yeah, this started out as, I don't think I'm going to finish this, and I don't think I would have, had I not had to. But I'm actually glad. I don't know. I'm on the fence. Maybe you'll convince me on this episode, but I'm unsure. But I finished it.
Okay, and that's fair. This is a very interesting book. Now, it first describes itself as being a lyrical book. Now, I actually would not have chosen that word to describe its writing style. But maybe you would have, or maybe there's some other way you might have described the way this book is written.
Kind of. I mean, I can see lyrical because it's so weird, because we're just fresh off reading The Familiar. And in The Familiar, she kind of sings little songs when she's gonna like do her like spell casting or her magic. And in this book, it's not as like direct. It's not as like in The Familiar, they would say, I have to sing this song or this chant to make this happen. And there's moments where it's like insinuated that that's what's happening. Like she says like hum her tune or say the words. She says say the words a lot. And I kind of interpreted that as a bit of a song, because in the beginning of the book, when they're talking about that Celtic Welsh lore that you mentioned, she has comrades in part of her life, I'm sure we'll get to, and they sing a lot. And a couple of them, they're just always singing. I don't know, like I'm sure we'll get to that. But so I get it, but it's just not as like direct.
So I know what you mean about it definitely has a fair amount of singing or implied singing within the book. But the reason why I say it doesn't feel lyrical to me is that kind of gave me an impression. I started remembering this movie. It's called The Renaissance Man. It's a Danny DeVito movie, and he's teaching some like army recruits Shakespeare because they need to be pass some tests. And so the army says, you need to teach these kids some Shakespeare. And they hate it. And so, but then he teaches them on how Shakespeare is actually supposed to be said almost in a certain cadence. There's a chant to it. And they drum it out in the movie, and it's like, this above all to thine own self be true. And there's supposed to be this kind of rhythm to it. And that's when I saw Lyrical, I started really thinking of that. Like, I was trying to find the rhythm of this story, of the way it was written. And I did find a couple parts where I did feel that, where you could kind of see where the story was, there was a kind of almost a chant occurring the way it was written. But the actual overall writing style really felt like a stream of consciousness. Like, it's just whatever was happening at the moment. So you'd be in a scene, and then as that's occurring, it would remind the main character of something in the past, and it would just switch to that without any warning. And you didn't even realize until maybe 2 or 3 sentences later that it's now in the past, and it's talking along, and suddenly it's back without any obvious cues that it had those types of changes had happened. And I think that's part of why it felt so challenging to read for me.
Yeah, I got so yes, definitely like totally moving all around, past, present, now, in her head, out of her head, talking out loud sometimes and not, and also the way she set up speaking, because there'd be paragraphs within the speaking, and I wouldn't sometimes when it changes like that, someone else is talking, but the quotations aren't ending at the first paragraph, so it's still just her talking, but the way the author organizes it is almost as if someone else were talking. And so like that, to me, even the structure of the writing was weird. But on the Lyrical, I don't know if you caught this, I didn't catch it till way later in the book, and only because I got annoyed. And that's because page 1 or 2, like super early, like she's doing her housewife thing. She's down by like a stream. She's got her cows. She needs to milk the cows. So she's basically like bringing in the cows from the field, and she's counting. Like, she can't help but count, which almost makes me, and this is all in her head, I think, which makes me wonder, does she have like a weird counting thing, right? But it's like 1, 2, 3 crows, and then 1, 2, 3 cows. She even does this with stuff that she puts in her parcel bag. Like, she's like, I'm gonna grab the 1 saucer and the 1 this and the 1, and there's a lot of like her counting everything around her, and I think that's setting a bit of a pace because it's in threes. It's always threes. Well, there's a couple other spots where it was a bit... Oh, and 6. 3s is the thing she counts around her. 6 is like her group of friends from another time in her life. And then I think there's another moment when she's like counting something going on. And she's always like, there's 6 of us strong, but I am the best. There was 5 others, but 1 is the strongest, and 6 total. And it goes... This happens in multiple times in one paragraph. She will keep counting. I think that's odd.
And there was actually many spots where it actually the words repeat immediately in order. So like there's this one spot near the end where she's like this is a single sentence, and it goes, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him, where she is, she's, I think and this is not spoken word, this is in her head, as she's basically kind of like pumping herself up for, this battle that's occurring, in that scene. And it was, it was really interesting the way that was done. There's a couple other characters that a lot of times when they're talking, they kind of have a little bit of a lyrical, like they chant the same words repetitively. Like one of them is constantly saying, liar, liar. And I always heard that in my head as being almost musical.
Yeah,
so.
It's weird because like oftentimes in book reviews or when I'm watching book reviews and someone like misses something, I think like, how could you miss that? That's so obvious. But I think any interpretation we read on this, like we get a lot of really cool comments in our YouTube comments. We've had some great ones lately, especially on the Warhammer book you mentioned. But I think whatever people comment on this, whatever they interpret, I'm going to be like, sure, man, whatever. I'm sure you're right. And I won't ever feel like, how could I miss that? Because it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, and so the other way I would kind of use to describe this book, other than lyrical, would have actually been ethereal or dreamlike. Like this whole book seemed to operate in almost dream logic, and I found that to be actually the my favorite part of this book because it makes the least sense. And I've commented before. I want to be explained to. I want to understand, but the way this book was written, it has this dreamlike quality where like the main character, they see something and then it starts changing as the description is going, and it's because it's changing to the past. This is reminding her of something in the past, and then once you start picking up on that, and it's like, oh, I get it, I understand how this works. And then another scene happens where they see like this ruined building, and as they approach, it seemingly just repairs itself, and now there's delicious smelling smoke coming out of the chimney, and you're like, oh, it just switched to the past again. But then all of the current timeline characters walk into the house, and it's like, wait, that just changed for them, and none of them are noticing, and it's weird. And but because this is a magical world and magic happens, and I found that to be very interesting.
I found that to be less interesting because it was the most I've ever had to reread parts of a book. Like, I think I said in your Warhammer book, there was pages I could be like, okay, is he just still trying to like walk through this forest? Okay, cool. Is any quotations happening? No, no one's talking. I'm good. I'll skip this. There was a couple times I felt like maybe not even bored, just like there's so much going on. And I also got a little behind. I was trying to read it quickly, but that's another thing. And I thought, well, my brain would kind of go ahead. But I'm like, what did I miss? You cannot skip half a page at all on this. Something else happened. Something weird happened. Something more. If she's counting more birds than this guy, I don't know. But it's a mind trip. And it's definitely for someone out there.
So I guess I should ask you a question that will kind of maybe explain this a little bit. So, and I've asked this one before, but if this was like a media property of some kind, is there something that you would use to kind of give someone else, like, what is this book like, or what is it about? Is there some other property you might reference and say, hey, if you like this, maybe that'll give you an idea what this book is like?
Oh yes, I know this one. I thought about this. I'm like, I don't know if he's gonna ask me this, but I couldn't help it. So this does not fit a movie for me. This does not fit a TV series for me, just because I feel like if it were a TV series, it's like season 1 of The Witcher, where they didn't do a good job like putting the timeline in place, and that was people's like number one complaints about that show, if I remember right. Is it was hard to follow. And then they fixed that, in later seasons. So I'm not saying this is like The Witcher at all. It's not. But it kind of happens like that in my mind. So I was trying to figure out, like, what is this? To me, this is your graphic novels. This is your Red Sonja, maybe even. Like, I don't think that you need a story for a book like this so much. Like, there was a lot, especially since the writing was screwy and all over the place. Like, I didn't even need it. Like, I think that the setting is really cool. I know we'll get to that. And I think I could have just seen this book graphic novel style, actually, and just been super happy. Like, way more happy. I get Wonder Woman vibes. I get some Red Sonja vibes. I just get strong, badass female warrior. I don't need the words. Plus, the cover's cool.
It is. It's a beautiful cover, and it's hard to see on the picture, but there's a lot of depth to that picture. Yeah, so initially when I first started this book, I was kind of I was going with just the background as my suggestion, like A History of Violence or The Equalizer, because those both have a character whose past badassness is coming back in the present. But really, that's just the start of the book. And as I started reading more into this book, I did think about the Witcher because of the timelines, but really the movie that really most gives me the feeling of this book is the movie called Mother, starring Jennifer Lawrence.
I haven't seen that,
Okay.
so I have no idea. So I hope our viewers have, because fill me in. Jennifer
So
Lawrence. Okay,
so
here we go.
Mother is a movie much like this book where it is very allegorical. A lot of things are implied but not actually said. You're also never quite trusting what's real throughout the whole story. You don't really know what's actually real and what's in their head, um, or if it was real a few seconds later, it's not. It's complete something different now. And I think that's why I think this story kind of reminds me of that, is because it does feel, almost a surreal, or as I mentioned earlier, dreamlike quality. Nothing quite feels very firm, like you would expect with a lot of traditional fantasy novels.
I was gonna be mad if she woke up. When you say dreamlike state, I didn't quantify it like that, like you did, or really think about it in that manner. But there was a couple moments where I thought, if this section of the book she's just dreaming and wakes up and it didn't happen, I will be pissed because I don't want to invest my time into reading. Oh, kidding. And I just like, even up until the end, which we never really talk about spoilers or anything, but even up until the very end, and this is one of those books that wraps it up in the last few pages. I was like, if they pull something out of here, if this is like, I can't do this. I can't recommend this book. But yeah, I did all right.
Okay.
Eh.
So I have a favorite character in this book. And but before I talk about my favorite character, I wanted to see what character, maybe not your favorite, but maybe which character stood out the most for you. The one that got the most kind of, you were most curious about, or had a special moment.
So I wasn't attached to any characters. I want to say that right now. This book did not give me any character attachment. We talked about like, would I have cried if someone had died? And there is a lot of dying in this book. We should probably make that clear. Tons of dying. We didn't do any trigger warnings. Like we did that with like a few of the books earlier, but there's guts and spilling of blood and chopping off of heads, and there's like just stuff. It's not good. So anyway, didn't really care if any of them died. I didn't even care that much if the main character died. But so I'm not going to say it was a favorite character. But I was fascinated by maybe more info about one. And that's actually her, I can't remember, she's the eldest daughter. I think she is, which her name is Sal. And only because, like, in this book there's magic. And Sal seems to have a different magic. But it's never focused on what the magic is. It is in a couple moments when she's able to produce some things, like her family's low on food and they're traveling, and so she's able to kind of make it happen, or make it appear, make it taste sweeter than it is. And that's definitely a gift that her mother has. The cows on the farm produce the sweetest, richest, fattest milk. They say that I don't know, 30 times in the book. So many times it's repetitive. That's the lyrical, I think. But there's like other things that she can do, and there's moments where it seems like she can hear better than everybody else. And there's times when so the mother has a kind of a lot of power. She's a wonderful warrior. She can even sing well. She can, she impacts things around her, like the sweeter cream of the cows, for example. And then I think she can shield. There's a bunch of stuff. But at some points it's unclear if some of that's coming from her daughter. And that's not ever fully explained. And her powers are never fully, without going too spoilery, realized. And so I think there was a lot left unsaid about what that daughter possessed. And she actually gives up a lot for her family at one point. So I was fascinated about what that magic was, because at this point, without getting spoilery, I'm trying to figure out the magic system. You and I love talking about magic systems, and this one just can't be figured out. That's fine. But like, I wondered a lot about Sal.
Yeah, no, and I found that to be very interesting. It seemed like the main character, because of her past, she has, not only is she a great warrior, but she does have some magical talents. And it seems like that her abilities were kind of split between her two elder daughters, because she has three daughters, but basically one is her least loved child, Calian, they frequently call her the least loved. But she's basically she takes more of the warrior traits, whereas Sal takes a little bit more of the caregiver and magical type traits from her mother. Even though at the start of the book they had no idea their mother was any of these things. She was just an average farm wife as far as they could tell. But for me, the character that most fascinated me.
Oh no! I feel like can I guess? Are you gonna let me or no?
Oh, go ahead.
Is it the bad guy that's like unnamed, doesn't really say himself till the end?
No, that is a very interesting character. No, the one that I found the most interesting was the one. It's called the Hodden. It's the monster. It is.
Oh.
It is a monster, and that they call the Hodden, and it's very vividly described.
Yeah.
And where it's basically sackcloth and a horse skull, and I found that to be very interesting, and so I was like, well, what's this based on? And so I searched for that word, and I didn't find it. There was no results, and I was like, but this book, and I kept reading the book, and as the book progressed, I was like, this creature is coming up far too much, and so specifically that this is not just something. I think this has got to be based on something. And I found it. And so I sent you a link. I want you to click on that.
I'm going to pull that up for us. Let me get it. All right, so I have it pulled up now. So let's talk about this.
All right, so there is in Wales, or in the Welsh culture, there's something called the Avari Lloyd. And it is the Christmas horse.
Christmas horse.
Yeah.
All right.
It's you bring it out when you're wassailing around on the 12th day of Christmas, and and you use it to help celebrate the new year.
Wow.
Or the Christmas
aren't terrifying
time.
At all.
Now, there is actually another name for this. There's the hoodening of Kent, which is the same kind of idea, but I found this to be fascinating. Like, I am really, like, I've always been kind of a Krampus fan, and I think I've now found my new. I totally want to build myself an Avari Lloyd and go around at the holiday times and cheer up the kids around the neighborhood.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I'm saying that kind of jokingly. This is actually a serious thing, and for some people in Wales, but it is I found this thing just to be endlessly fascinating. There's even videos on YouTube where you can watch people practicing this custom, like walking around with their Christmas horse, and I really found this whole thing to be very interesting. And
I'm surprised that you said that. I mean, it threw me off when you first said it, but then you started, I'm like, this is so Rob. This is so Rob that you would say that. But can we say, without being too spoilery, that there's kind of two versions of this horse, like whether or not, depending on who created?
Yeah. So what this is in the story, this is not a person holding a stick with a skull. This is a creature. This is kind of like a necromantic construct. So that whoever creates it can kind of empower. They're the ones giving it orders and instructions. So if a bad person creates it, then it's going to be bad. If a less bad person creates it, then it's going to be less bad, and so forth. So this isn't exactly the same thing, which is actually probably why it's named slightly differently. But I did find the whole concept as a creature almost inspiring. I definitely want to bring this creature, maybe the one more from this book, into a future D&D game, because I just found this to be just super cool.
It was super cool, and later on in the story you get like invincible vibes with this horse, or at least I did. Once you learn kind of, I think that's spoilery, so I don't want to give it away. But when you learn something about this character, I guess it is a character now. I didn't really think about that before. But like, if anybody plays like World of Warcraft or reads like the lore, because I love to read the books from World of Warcraft, it's very invincible, and the body or like type that this character takes on later on is more like that, and less kind of like what we just pulled up. At least that's how I pictured it in my mind. But I definitely got that like hobbity horse
Yeah.
kind of look with the first part of this character's story arc. We'll call it a story arc because this character definitely has one. So
Absolutely does. And I found this character, despite the fact it actually doesn't really talk, it kind of makes neighing noises. And even when it's not on camera per se, they can hear it off in the distance, making noises as it approaches. And I found this character just a I looked forward to the next time it was going to be in the scene.
oh my gosh. Okay, well you got me there. Good laugh out of me, and now I feel more fond about those parts of the book, so that's very good. All right, what else you got for me?
I guess I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the themes of this book. I feel like there definitely are some pretty strong themes to this story, but I wanted to see what you kind of came up with. Like, what was the story generally trying to tell?
Okay, so past and present, for sure, right? Like this woman has a past, right? And that's just more clear, and that's just an obvious thing. And what she's grown to be, she has these kind of many lives in a way. And so that's kind of the first one. The second one is just like strong, like it's feminism. It's really embracing women in a way I have not seen a book do. This book openly talks about menstrual cycles. Talks about things that happen to women. I mentioned this in my halfway, but things that talk to about women, and things about women like sagging boobs, things that happen to your body after you have children, the things like not being able to control your urine, maybe if you've had children, even how sex is different for women, how we're perceived differently after we have children, gray in your hair. And this is a woman who also we've defined and said is a warrior, the best of all warriors, a strong warrior, like strong Wonder Woman vibes. But here she is, aging body, sagging breast, weird, like going into menopause, and she still is that same person. So very, very strong feminism vibes here, and I loved that because I have not personally read a book that takes you so deep down that journey. And I actually texted you something. I can't remember what exactly it said. 1 second, let me get it. Farts are the equivalent of starter villain fucks in this book.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's a lot of farting. I was surprised at how much farting there is, which leads me into the other tone of the book, or other just subtle nuances of the book, what they're trying to get across, what the author is trying to say is just family. Like, this is a very real portrait of a woman, and it's a very real portrait of her family. There's times she's like looking over at her husband, like, and he's sleeping, but she says at one point, like, you have smelly breath, like, you're like, you smell bad right now. And then like at the same moment in her brain, because like she's thinking about this of her husband, but yet like her 4-year-old's toddling around, like touching stuff, and in her head she's just like, the 4-year-old's running around touching stuff again, my husband stinks, when he rolls over his sleepy farts, like. And then like meanwhile the 2 older children are fighting, and like, I don't know, just a very accurate representation of what like families really are like. And I thought that was super cool. I also have teens right now, so I empathize with this woman's poor life of like feeling like a warrior, because I totally do most days. Like, I've rocked some cool shit in my life, but I'm also going through, like, I'm turning 40 this year, like, and stuff's getting weird. Not like her level of weird, but like, get weird. And then like you have these teens that don't think you're cool, and I'm like, I'm cool as shit. Like, I'm cool as shit. Like, you guys have no idea. And that's her. So I totally get this woman.
Yeah, no,
I love that.
And I pretty much got the same kind of thematic like vibes that you did. It like motherhood is a very important part of this story, not just the physical parts which you talked about, which is not something I think is ever really referenced in media. Not in movies or books that I've really seen. Not and certainly not to the graphic descriptions of this book.
Yeah,
Which
at one point she says to her husband, "Okay, listen, watch the kids. I need to go. Like, she needs to like change her rag. Like, basically, like
Yeah.
she needs to go take care of that. Like, what? So I don't know. When you read parts like that, were you just like, hot damn, woman? Like, what?
well, she was going into the last fight, and she's like, and she was grumpy that she was, she had to like in this that she was essentially menstruating at the time of the last fight, and that really just irritated her. She's like, why does it have to be today? Like,
It's so real. It's so real. But I also want any men to know that might be watching this. Like, it's done in a funny way too, and it's not done in a gross way. It's not overly detailing her taking care of this process. So don't feel like reading it's going to be like, oh wait, what? I have to read what? It's not like that.
no.
It's funny. And it's mostly in her head, like, oh, for fuck's sake, I have to do this again. Like, come on. Like, in her head, she's thinking, can I just be done with this?
Yeah. And also like with the whole motherhood thing, like there's whole sections of this book where her kids and I think their kids are the two older kids are supposed to be like 16 and 12, and the youngest one is only like 4 to 6. And so like they're pretty young, and they are just badgering her and dogging on her and be like, you are the worst, and the husband is obviously he feels a bit betrayed by the fact that she had this amazing like past life before she ever met him, and I think he's also a bit jealous, that she had this great life before she met him. But the whole time in her head she's like, but I chose this. This is what I actually want. I want you guys, and I want my smelly husband, and I want my irritating kids. They are actually what's important to me. I gave up all of that because I wanted this, and I don't care about the sagging boobs and the farts and all that kind of stuff, because this
Lots of parts.
this is what I want. And I found that theme to be actually really kind of endearing for this character. Her kids I found to be just insufferable, but they're supposed to be. I mean, they're absolutely supposed to be. And like, there's these whole times where the kids are just badgering her. I'm like, why aren't you fighting? You are a coward. Like, they're yelling at their own mother. And the whole time she's like, yeah, I can't. Like, I have to follow the old ways. And, we have it's kind of like the laws of hospitality in the Dresden Files or Game of Thrones, where if you drink at someone else's table, you cannot fight anymore. If you share food with another person, you cannot fight until while you're still in that moment. And so she's like, I literally can't. But she really can't talk about it too much. And her kids think that she's just like this careless, thoughtless monster because she's behaving in a way that they don't understand. And they jump to the worst conclusion. And I found that to actually be very realistic to just life. People often jump to the worst conclusion of things, not thinking that, oh, maybe this person, they're not doing this because they're mad at me or angry, or they're just dealing with their own thing and they're just not noticing. That and people jump to those conclusions all the time in the real world, and this is just kind of a very focused version of that common thing in life.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I'd say that part's extremely well done, right? The themes of the book, motherhood and family and feminism, is just fantastic. Like, I loved all of that, and that's not where I had problems with in this book. So
Okay.
I'm sure we'll get to those.
Well,
but yeah, there's just stuff.
So I guess let's what are the things, the aspects of this book that I guess most frustrated you or upset you as you were reading it?
Oh God. Oh, there's so much. I don't know where to start. I feel like it's like a 20-part question. But like I mean, there's just times, yes, there's times you said where she absolutely cannot break certain rules. Okay, let's remember, let's recap. She's a badass. She's got to fight the bad guys. The bad guys have come to her new kind of life, and they've sort of haunted her from the past. And she's got to eliminate them. They're threatening her family. It's bad news bears. It's not good, right? So there's times in this book where she's slayed whole armies. Like it will say very mythological like wording, and that makes sense. You know, Celtic. It says mythology on the. It doesn't say mythology, but you get it. And it says like she swung her sword and killed 1,000 men, and I get it. And she's older, so she's older and she's in this new part of her life. But there's still a couple fights where she like swings her sword and dude's dead. Swings her sword and dude's dead. And we get this, and we get other parts in the book multiple times in the book. I was losing my mind where it's like, how is the dude not dead? Now, there's some creatures in the book that can't die. Later on, that's kind of figured out. But like, there's a lot of creatures in here, and you know, it's kind of an undead, kind of like magically not dead people that can't die for whatever magical reasons, and there's good ones and bad ones. So if you can't unalive someone, you could kind of make it very difficult for them to re-alive. And she has these moments many times, cup or no cup, that you drink from, where like, how could you swing your sword, kill 1,000 people or 100, whatever, but like he's right in front of you, and the book takes ages for the like pages, okay, pages sometimes in this one moment, and for some reason it's moving slow, and maybe that's another nod to the author's really interesting writing style. Maybe it is happening slow for that person in their mind when they talk about like time slows down and they're I got that because I'm like, why is he not dead yet? Why is this is a lot of times, particularly in one of the last scenes.
Yeah.
Very slowly. There's three people she's fighting. It's like legit three people, and
Yeah.
there's three of them.
And
It's like
I
three against
remember
three.
I remember in the very first time we really encounter the bad guys, and this is early on in the book, probably first maybe 5 chapters. They encounter the bad guys in person, and they kill them, and then the bad guys just get back up, and and without explanation, and they're like, "We're gonna get you guys next time," and then
They
they just
can't cross water or something weird.
and then they
They're
just
staring
turn
at each other over a stream.
yeah, and then they just turn around and walk away, and you're thinking like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah,
And
because it's like the first thing.
yeah, because you're like, if they can't die, why wouldn't they just? Why does this fight not just continue? And yes, there's some suggestion of the water, but you just fought at the water, like
With a broken sword.
yeah.
Or like a gross, it's not the sword at the time, it's not good.
So so you're trying to and it doesn't explain anything. It's just like,
No.
nope, this is the rules of this world. Now, eventually, some of this does get explained, very vaguely, but I did find the lack of explanation on some things to be frustrating. But it was more frustrating in the moment. So like especially when it was shifting timelines, going to the past or going back to the present, I found myself being like, this doesn't make any sense. And then and I go back and I reread it and I'm like, no, this makes no sense. And then 2 sentences later, it's like, oh, we're back in that timeline. That's why. And it wasn't clear. But I think it's intentionally not clear. Like,
Did you reread as many pages as me, do you think? Like I talked earlier, like I found myself rereading more than I've ever had to go backwards and reread.
probably. I found especially in the first half. I'd say in the second half, not so much. The first half, I definitely did a lot more rereading. And the first but the second half, it doesn't. The timeline jumps are much more minimal, or they're much more they're like explicitly obvious. So, but it was more that first half I found myself having to reread stuff. But it wasn't the fact I didn't need to reread it. I just needed to read two more sentences, and then I understood. It's just that it wasn't being clear because of the what we're calling the lyrical format. Is it wasn't clear yet because of the way it was written.
Yeah, and I find like I can get a bit smooth brain at work. I work with like engineers. I work with a lot of technical people. I'm in a small company right now, so there's more people that are in the technical field and less people that aren't right now. Eventually, as companies get bigger, that changes. But anyhow, I can feel smooth brain there. I am not smooth brain when it comes to like reading and understanding. I've read a lot of books. You've read a lot of books, and I'm like, where's my ripples, man? I'm rippleless at times when I was reading this because I'm like, I had to go backwards, like, and I'm not talking like backwards a lot. I'm talking like just like a paragraph back, like
Yeah.
what happened?
Like, you're trying to figure out, did I miss
Yeah.
something? Did I accidentally skim something? And you go back and no, you didn't.
Yeah, because I wasn't trying to skim,
No, and
you know.
and it was more just because the way it was written, and I think that was, like I said, and I don't necessarily want to fault the book for this because I felt like this was deliberate. I don't feel like the book was written badly. Like that
No.
this was oh, this is just a poorly written book. It needed more editing. No, I think these things were written deliberately in this specific way, and sometimes I felt like I am too stupid to read this book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a chapter out of some like advanced English for like you're gonna be like an English major. You want to be an author someday. You're in college for this. This is some semester like they're studying this type of writing. I feel like this is like very very high level of writing style in many very many moments. Having that said, I don't feel like it's high level storytelling just because, and don't get me wrong, I love the story. Great stories make great graphic novels, otherwise you wouldn't make a graphic novel. And I said it's like a graphic novel earlier, but like just because there's too many discrepancies that really really bothered me. Like how come you with your broken down body and your old rusty sword could kill these people that you're going to encounter a lot because they won't die. Like you literally just did that in the first few pages of the book, and then later there's the same kind of people, and there's more of you. You have a trained person with you. You have like people who are skilled with weapons, right? In the scene we're talking about, she's the only person with a weapon, and then later it's like, wait a minute, it was like 1 to 4, 1 to 3, and now it's like 3 to 4. Now y'all have weapons and you can't kill them, or it's taking you 20 pages to kill them and it took you like a paragraph. I just don't get it, Rob. And I don't get the magic. It was just like that part of the storytelling for me, that part of the writing. Like it was clear this author wanted to write a technically cool, very like, look, I wrote a song and a book and a poem and I weaved in Celtic lore and oh, she's Wonder Woman too. But like, oh yeah, the story, fuck that. Like that's why. Yeah, you know? I don't need a great story. I don't need all the holes fit in because look how amazing I wrote it.
That's
Vanna White stuff. I don't know. I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
all right. So I guess we'll review the parts of the story and we'll finish up this discussion. So we've already talked a little bit about the prose, the actual writing style of this book. And one of the things we didn't talk about is the chapters. Like there's some chapters that are 40 pages long. There's some chapters that are 2 sentences long. And there's another chapter that's 2 pages, but maybe 15 words spread across the 2 pages. Like,
Yes.
it is, but once again, this is all very deliberate feeling. Like it feels like, and I do actually sometimes, most of the time I think, I understood why that chapter was. Like one of the short chapters, it was just like this internal like monologue that she was having in the middle of this other scene. So the scene's happening, it all of a sudden chapter breaks for this internal thought process, and then it breaks again for and then it goes back to that scene, or it, and or it. So, but it was unusual. We've talked a little bit about unusual chapter lengths and stuff before, but this took that to an extreme. And so for prose, I found that to be very interesting. And it wasn't bad, it was just very interesting. And the overall book, we've already discussed a bit of how it was written, is unusual and challenging to write, or challenging to read. So I guess, how would you rate this book and why?
Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking like some chapters are like a sonnet, some are a jingle, right? And like that's just like the lyrical side of it. And some are like I don't know. It's just it's tough. I want to rate it very high in terms of writing capability, which is not something that we've talked about too much. A little bit when we talk about like your Mark Lawrence book recommendation, but like, oh man, this author is incredibly capable and it's cool, right? Like I would say that that's kind of cool what she did, and I wasn't even. I said this was almost a DNF. I almost did not want to finish this. As you read the book more and more, you realize like you start to appreciate it more. Like I appreciate what she did. I can't say that I liked it.
Okay.
I don't know. If I had to rate this, it's like I toggle between 5 on like holy crap you did that, and 1s and 2s of like I didn't enjoy reading those sections. I really didn't enjoy in the beginning hearing her counting cows and crows in the sky. It was frustrating. I probably in the middle. I think we have to go with a 3 on this for me. But shoot, almost a 4. This is tough, Rob. Like, I'm gonna give the writing a 4, just for sheer interesting alone.
Yeah, and just because something is written in a challenging way and doesn't really reflect on its quality, there's lots of good books that are not the easiest to read. Tolkien and Chaucer and Shakespeare, for that matter, they're all challenging to read, especially for someone that's not used to it, or from a different time period. Like there's a lot of sci-fi that I've read from like the 60s to 80s that doesn't see it feels like it's written wrong, but it's just written. It was written in a different time period when different words and like sentence structures were more commonly used, or references to culture that I am not understanding. So, and that's the same thing with all the older stuffs. And while this is a brand new book, it came out in 2023. It is, it kind of has that feeling of something written in a very different manner than pretty much anything else, like by far anything else we've covered. So
Yeah.
I would definitely rate the prose of this book as a 4 as well. I think this is very good, very interesting, and challenge. I like that it's challenging.
Yeah, hang in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you choose to read this, hang in there. If you feel like that, I might not finish this book, just keep going. She does have chapters that are just pure beauty in the way that she writes. Like at one point, you feel a bit of a song in her words, because she talks to. There's like an inanimate object later on the book that she talks to. That I feel like she has a personal relationship with this object, that is cool. The way the author writes it, she gives a personality, which I think people should read that. They'll know when they get to it. That's a skill. The author's very skilled. It also makes me wonder if she sought this publisher, or if she might have been more pushed towards an independent publisher like this, because I can't see maybe your large. I'm trying to think of like the giant publishing houses like Bantam and Penguin Books and like huge publishing houses. This is risky.
Yeah,
It's a risky pickup.
I would agree. It's definitely more of a risky pickup, and so her going to a smaller house makes a lot of sense. And like I said, I found out after I had chosen this book that this is apparently not her normal writing style. She writes a lot more traditional grimdark, and this whole lyrical format was, more specific to this story. But I guess, how do you feel about the characters? Did any like did you feel? You already mentioned you didn't really feel any attachment, but did they interest you, or did you get enough information about them to picture them in your head like you like to do?
Yeah, I did, but there was even some contradictive points in the book. There, especially with her husband. Um, she often says it's not why I married him. It's not why I married him, and she'll say that like his wit. The very one of the very first things I remember reading about in the book was like I didn't marry him for his wit. And then she says later, well, I didn't marry him for his charm, I think, or I didn't marry him for, and she counts on and on and on and on about all the things she didn't marry him for, but never really talks about things she did marry him for. So you don't get a ton of like qualities about the husband that stand out. I think he's later on, like there's a moment when he's trying to get on a horse, and she says, "Well, he's not a tall man." And I was like, "Oh, I kind of pictured him taller." And then so that kind of contradicted. And then at the very end of the book, very end, she describes him again and says he's a tall man. So I was like, or that immediately for me ruined some of the character development with him. So she really loves him, and that's very, very clear. But I never got a fully accurate picture because it mostly referenced why she didn't marry him. But he's a good father, she says a lot, but then makes some questionable fatherly kind of choices at moments. But that's also stress, grief, loss. Like his feelings become very affected later by events that happen in the story, and starts, I think, maybe even going slightly out of character because he's grieving about events that have happened. But anyhow, because of that, like not fully describing him in particular, I really struggled with that character. And then I felt like some characters just fell heavily into tropes. So I think Callian, I think that's how you describe it, one of her daughters. I felt like I knew everything that character was going to do. And it was just like very teenage angsty. I can do it myself, but also I want to be just like you, Ma, because they find out that their mom's a badass. So character development for me was rough, and continued to stay rough. Sal, I mentioned earlier, was a character I was very interested in. Really wanted to find out kind of what her magical abilities were. She makes some cool choices to help her family along their journey, but then I don't feel like some of those decisions were strengthened by the story. Like they seem to not matter later. So I don't know. Characters for me fell super, super flat. I'm going to give characters in this book a 2.
So I'm not sure why the because I actually felt like I should have felt more development from the her past friends and Lord, all the people from her past were from his place called Roven, and I felt like I should have gotten more from them. They are a very diverse cast of interesting characters, and but and they do change over the course of the story, but they still very much felt very one dimensional. Now these are her memories of them. I don't think these are not flashbacks. This is her thinking of the past, and so she might be an unreliable narrator in that regard. That she's thinking of them one dimensionally. Whereas the characters in the present, they are changing as the story progresses. But I never really felt much attachment to them. I never was, very deeply involved or like committed. Like, oh, I'm worried about what's going to happen to them next. I just didn't get that attachment. So I'm actually going to agree with you. I'm going to say that for me, the character development overall was a 2. They're still very interesting characters, but since they are mostly the same from beginning to end, it doesn't change. I didn't feel that evolution that I was looking for.
Yeah, I should state that she gives plenty of facts about them. And maybe that is how you remember things. Maybe we're, not giving it enough credit. I'm not sure, but it's like when we kind of go backwards into the past, it's like we know this guy's married. We know that his husband enjoys going to parties. We know that this person has a handicap, like a disability, but is great at riding horses. And it's like, well, this person, really enjoys it. It's very clear. There's a lot of like care into like giving these characters kind of stories or backstories and facts, but then that's it. Like, I
Okay.
can't tell you what they look like. So yeah, I don't know, but it's not terrible. I'm glad she built those things in. I liked the story of the character that could ride well but couldn't walk well. Sweet.
Yeah. Now here's a rating that I think we will, while we've agreed so far, I think we're going to diverge on this one, and it's the magic.
Ugh.
So if you could rate the magic, how would you rate it for this story?
I kind of hated the magic. I hated the magic. There's times I liked it where it was clear that it was like part of a process. And so I get very like, but I've talked about this before. I don't love spellcasty kind of mage like magic a lot of the times unless it's clear where they're pulling the magic from. So this magic seemed. So first, let's kind of talk about the different types of magics that I felt like I was there. So there's like, almost, I don't know if it's divine or like godlike, kind of like Thor in like Greek mythology. There's like a central character from her past life that like basically kind of made them all. He's like godlike or godlike powers because she was created, and it talks about what she was created from, and her brethren and our brothers and sisters of sorts from her past life were made, and it talks about like she's made from clover and this one's made from wind and song. Like, okay. Yeah, and so we pulled from natural elements, I suppose, I don't know, to make people warriors. And then so there's that's interesting. And then there's blood magic. There's definite blood magic in this, weaved in with some sort of potential spell casting plus objects, right? So she's got to sacrifice her blood. And then there's dark magic of sorts, and this is where we get our kind of like zombie like undead sort of creatures. And what did you call the horse-like thing again? What was that called?
The Hodden, or
Hodden. Okay. Yeah, and so that sounds to me like spell casting sort of ritual. And then there's like the magic of making nothing out of something, sort of like I don't know, like her daughter can do when she just produces food out of nowhere. It's like an empty cabinet. So I felt like the magic wasn't consistently. I feel like if you have a god like a Thor and Hercules and all these, that person has powers. Other people don't have powers generally. So then you take that, but now it's like there's all these kind of other evil powers and blood magic ritual stuff. I felt like it didn't match. And so I just felt like the magic was from maybe 2 or 3 different books. And it was never, ever, ever, oh my gosh, ever explained. The only part of the magic that made the most sense to me would have been the mythology part in the very beginning, because at least I can follow that. It sounds like something else, like I said, sounds like your Thor type stuff. But the rest of it, I didn't. I liked there's blood magic at a few parts. Made sense to me. She was going through a process. Maybe at times she needed a bone from this, a hair from that, your blood from this, a rock in just the right spot. That's neat. Maybe it's a spell. Maybe it's in a book somewhere. Maybe she was taught it, but it never says how. I don't know, Rob. I'm stuck on this one because parts of it were neato. Magic wasn't non-existent. I don't know. 2.
okay. So I think for me, where I draw the line on this one is I don't think there's really a magic system. I think that this is a magical world. The world itself is inherently magical, and they're drawing from the world. And so one of my favorite moments from this book, it's early on in the story, and it's where the Six of Roven, these mythological heroes of the past, of which Kanda is their leader. She's one of the 6, and she's kind of the leader of the band. And they're crossing like this land bridge out to an island, which probably means it's not an island, but let's ignore that. But they leave one of theirs behind to basically guard the horses, and then the other five are walking across this land bridge out to this island. And as they start walking, this fog kind of falls. And they're walking and they're walking and they're walking. It just goes on and on about their walking, and they're conversing about it, and then they're walking some more. And finally, one of them just gives up, and he's like, "Fine." He reaches into his bag and he throws a bunch of money out into the water. And the fog lifts, and they're there. They're at the island. And and then when they go to walk, they turn around to walk back after they do what they came to do. They can see the person that they left behind. They're like right there. It's a short walk. And but the reason why I feel like that's actually kind of one of my favorite moments is you get a lot of that in mythology, and especially like Greek type mythology. You get a lot of that in like Dungeons and Dragons type mythology with the different like sea gods that you're supposed to throw money out into the water or they're going to spoil your voyage. And but this is basically like natural magic of the world, like nature spirits, and the and I like that. I find that to be very interesting and compelling. There's another similar scene. I kind of mentioned it earlier where they see this burned out house, but as they approach, it starts reforming and becomes basically a fully formed house, and there's people inside and there's wood smoke. And the characters don't really comment on that, but the audience is made to understand. The audience, the reader, is made to understand that this has happened, and they don't acknowledge it. And it's because this is a magical world where I think, especially like as it relates to the conclusion of this book and some stuff in the middle, it's will. It's a force of will can actually change reality. This is a kind of magic used in a game called Mage the Ascension. It's you're imposing your will on reality, and reality is changing to match your will. And I find that kind of magic, it's a bit hand wavy, but I think
very hand wavy.
But I find that to be very interesting. I actually find the mythology of the setting to be very cool. But we'll answer that in a second. So as far as the magic itself, I found that to be very, very interesting. It's not a magic system at all. It's not superpowers, but it's just the magic of at least special people are able to impose on the world. And I found that to be very interesting. So I'm going to rate this a 3.
Okay, I thought you were going way further with that. But like, I get where you're going. I can accept a lot of that, but I like it more if you're gonna say it's from the world. Cool. In some books where that happens or exists, like I'm trying to think of what was the one, Swordcatcher. People admit and understand people unlike them have it. And so maybe it's because this is in her mind, I'm not sure, but like there's village people and stuff that I think kind of very clearly don't have it. But they never call them like spellcasters or magic weavers or insert whatever you want there. Like it's not clear that, to me at least, that magic should have existed in this world because it took so long to happen. And I think that's because I took a while to sort out, are these two the same settings? Because I wasn't sure.
And so let's talk about that. So we're gonna do it. We're gonna rate the setting itself. So the reason why I want to talk about the setting is I think the setting is actually an important almost character to this book, and the evolving understanding of that is actually a big part of this plot. The actual plot of the book, if you break it down into an outline, not much happens because we're really focused on the relationships of the family and the bad guys and what happened in the past and why she's no longer this, mythological warrior. And so I was curious how you felt about the setting of this book.
So I touched on it briefly. It just took me a while to figure out what's going on with the setting. So there's definitely two, present and past. and it didn't become clear that those were on the same in the same setting. So I think about like the Pantheon, and I think about like almost like a spot where the gods live. And maybe is this another world? And so I thought maybe she have fallen to Earth or Earth like or wherever her home is. Doesn't really say. Feels like Earth or like a medieval Earth. But I didn't know. It's unclear how she got there or if she was always there. So later on, characters start to merge from her past and present, but it actually never says if they were always there. It doesn't. So I'm still unsure, but my brain has settled on the fact that it's the same place.
Okay.
I think. But it's I don't know. The setting's weird. So the setting, let's just say the setting is beautiful in a way because they travel a lot. There's a lot of travel in this book. It's very well outlined, very well explained. We talked about this a bit when we read the Poppy Wars. That travel was sort of fast. Like, oh, they're here now. They're here now. It doesn't really talk about getting there, but there's a lot of walking in this book. It's up there with like hobbits going to Mordor, okay? Like we are walking a lot. And you get the landscape along the way. You get the setting. So I like I said, I do picture like medieval kind of Earth. I do picture sort of like, like walking to Mordor, but a different mountain. And so yeah, setting description was good. I'm fine with where it was at. I still am unclear if her past and present are in the same location. There's spots that make me feel like it is, and then there's spots that make me definitely feel like it's not. So, but I like both settings, whether or not they are or are not independent of each other, equally. Like there's
Okay.
it's cool though. So there's a series that some people might really know, and it's like the Throne of Glass series. It's kind of like another series from Sarah J. Maas. And in that series, there's a compatible kind of world where there's like people who are blessed, almost godlike, they have magical powers, and it's kind of like this beautiful area, gorgeous, nice place. And I kind of think about that like this. And in this other world that she's lived in, sort of her past, it's very descriptive of her. Like she has to repair a town one time that she beat up and destroyed too much, kind of in a fight, or was destroyed as part of the fight. And going to that like sort of island peninsula, whatever you want to call it, with her friends of the past, that was cool too. So yeah, I am unclear though.
Okay.
Three.
All right. So for me, I definitely kind of gotten the same vibes, the mythology type vibes on this book, where the halls of Roven, from her past, that's the place she lived, um, very much felt like an Asgard or Mount Olympus.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
And whether you think of Asgard or Mount Olympus as being on a different place, or there's just a small location within the rest of the world, that but like these heroes, the Lord of Roven had the six of Roven that he would send out to solve the world's problems. People would ask for help, and he would send the six. And then someone else would ask for help, and he'd send maybe three of them. And then someone else would ask for help, and he'd send the six again. So this felt actually more like prayers. People were praying for help, and these, angels of Asgard or Olympus would come down to solve their problem. So, and you kind of mentioned that you felt like the six were created, um, and there's certain aspects of, especially the Lord of Roven, that don't really make sense in
Right.
in a real world type of, um, you know, but in a mythology type setting, it's perfectly sensical. So I kind of also, my head canon agreed that there essentially there was an Asgard or a Mount Olympus. That's where Roven is, and then the six of Roven would go down to the normal world where all the mortals live and solve problems. And sometimes they did that well, and sometimes, maybe not as well. But and then when she decided to become a farmer's wife. I thought she did explain why she found her husband is because she picked him because he had a good heart. He was a good person. Now, he wasn't the smartest, he wasn't the most attractive, but he was a good person.
Yeah, I can see that. She just only called on the negative stuff
Yeah.
most of the time, so I think that got lost. But
And,
it's clear he's a good person and a good father.
but as the events of the story happened, he definitely reacts very, you know, maybe out of character to those events. At least maybe the way she had hoped he would. So she's almost like, you know, a fallen angel in a Christian type sense, or a demigod in like a Greek god type of sense. And her children, are inheriting some of her divine powers, and that's why one is more of a warrior, and the other one's kind of got some magic powers. And the youngest, we don't know if she got anything. She's just a little too young. But you know, that would be more like the demigod, like a Hercules type of story, where they got a little bit of power, you know, from their divine parent, at least divinely inspired parent. So I found the whole setting to be the best part of this book. So I would actually put this as a 5. I think the setting was the absolutely the best part of this book, and exploring that setting with the characters I found to be the most interesting part. Even if I didn't feel the characters were as well developed, I felt the world, you know, and then the actual real world was very dark and gritty and realistic. You know, that they have you know, even just like their neighbors, they're like, well, you know, we liked the neighbor, but his kids kind of,
Apple Bob or
yeah,
something like that.
but his kids are, you know, his son's kind of a tool, you know.
Yeah.
And so I found,
You know, I feel. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I feel like when you're saying these things, what this book needed was a map.
yeah,
If it had that, I might be with you. Like if it was like Asgard's up here, and here's where the poor civilians live. Here's the Rainbow Ridge where she rides her horse down.
yeah.
Like I needed that.
So I felt very very strong that that was actually my favorite part of this, was the setting itself. And I've said that before about some of the other books, like the Sword Catcher, where I felt the setting was probably the strongest part of that book. But you know, I agree on this one. That setting was probably the best part for me.
I ranked it lower, but you talked it up a bit more, but I'm going to hold where I said, just because it was a bit confusing in the beginning. They're riding their horses back to they're riding their horses back across the land to get back to where Lord Rovan is, or whatever his name is. That to me seems like they're on this world,
Yeah.
not up wherever he is. So it's just unclear.
Yeah.
That's okay though.
And in the case of like Mount Olympus, that is a real mountain in Greece. You can go to that mountain. You know, it's just people in the past weren't able to climb it, or they were too afraid to.
Okay.
But
all right.
anyway,
well,
so
fair enough.
So I guess let's rate the book as a whole. We've talked about all the parts. Let's kind of finish out the story. So how would you rate this book, especially in comparison to some of the other books we've reviewed before?
All right, so I've since moved my halfway ones a bit. So gosh, I have to think. Like, is this? I did not like this as much as I liked Swordcatcher. I did not like this as much as I liked Book That Wouldn't Burn. Right? Gosh, but it's not. It's not like a 2 either. I'm struggling between a 2 and a 3. This happens a lot. I think readability and me wanting to not finish this book plays a huge part into it. Me being able to refer this to people. I think people who like to read really enjoy reading. Like, it is fun for them. It is a hobby. If that is you, you should read this book. It's really cool, the writing style. I think it's very interesting. Your brain expands, and I'm opened up to something new. And that to me that's high. That's amazing. The story just fell apart. There's too many holes. There's even a hole with the king for me, or Lord Rovan, whatever he was called. I hope you know the part. I'm not sure if I can say it, but like he makes some children, like crafts them out of wind and honey or whatever. But then there's another one, and that's an odd part of the story. I'll just leave it at that. There's an odd, but so he makes children in different ways, and that was weird, and that's never really answered. Too many plots, too many holes in the story, too many things not wrapped up enough for me. Not enough character development at all. I'd say in general this book was a 2, but the writing is so interesting that I think I'll leave it at a 3.
A 3 then?
Yeah, I think so.
I was honestly, I thought I was very convinced that you were going to rate this 101.
No,
I actually did not think that you were going to like this at all. So that's impressive.
I didn't like this at all, and I think readers should hear that. I did not. I almost did not finish this book, but I do appreciate what the author did. I really love what she did for women. Really love what she did for mothers. I relate, even though I was not sad if she would have died, because no character development, not enough, but I relate to her. This book is relatable on ways that are so cool, yet very difficult, I think, for your average reader to get into.
Okay. For me, I think this book was very, as I said, it's a very challenging read, but I don't find any fault with the fact that it's challenging to read. I think that's might even be a benefit. The story itself, the setting, I like this. I like the world and the mythology of this world. That way the way the world reacts to the characters, like even the mountain that they spend a good amount of time interacting with this mountain. The mountain changes over the course of the story. It has different, depending on the mood of the characters and what's going on, the mountain actually changes around them. And I found that to be just fascinating. I'm actually, I would actually put this as being a tie with The Book That Wouldn't Burn for me. For very similar reasons. I think it's wonderfully written. But it's not a 5 because I'm not invested in these characters. I didn't feel that connection. That if I had, I would have pushed this higher. But I just really liked this story, despite the fact I struggled to read it, especially that first half until I really started getting into the flow and the way it's written, and I stopped having to reread. Once I kind of got past about that midway point, the book progressed a lot faster, and I really did enjoy it after that. But that first part, and it's not that it was a slog, as some books can be. It's just that it's hard to read at times.
Yeah, but I think we can also help, like, talk about our rating by saying, are we glad we read it? Mm-hmm. Some books, like John Scalzi's Starter Villain, I'm not glad I read that. I can't say that I'm glad I read that. I would like that time back. I would like the Poppy War back. I do not like either of those books. They're not great. That's why they're 2s for me. This is not a bad book. I'm glad I read it. Okay. That's tough, though. It's tough to put it on the same level as, like, books I would read again, like The Swordcatcher. I like Cassandra Clare. It's weird to put it on the same line, but again, we're talking about different reasons, right? Yeah. There's different reasons why it's in that 3 column for me. Probably same for you.
Yeah. And now one of the things I didn't notice until actually just prior to this review was this is actually planned as the first book in a series.
What? No.
Look. There's a title, there's a name of the series. I think it's on the 3rd page.
Oh, no.
This says,
Wait.
It says book 1.
Oh, maybe we did know this. See, I'm not reading it. I'm not reading book 2. I'm not doing it. I can't do it again. I am glad I read it. 3. Never again.
Well, that answers that question. So, I guess that's it for today. We reviewed the book. I rated it a 4. You rated it a 3. for the most part, we essentially tied our reviews of both of us tied our reviews of the book that wouldn't burn. Um, and I, at least for me, I felt like that was the right place for it. So it's a good book, challenging read though.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for subscribing. I'm going to say that early because I'm pretty sure you're going to, right? We're going to get to that 100. Next week, we're picking out our next 2 books. So if you're new to the channel, you're not missing out on a chance to read with us, and we hope you join in on our next books, and we'll see what Rob picked for me, and we'll see what I picked for Rob.
All right.
See you next time.
See you then.